Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Accelerate webinar series hosted by the Daniels College of Business Executive Education Division. I'm David Worley, Executive Director, and I'll be your host. These webinars are designed to help you accelerate your capacity to deliver results for your organization. Today's webinar will be roughly 25 minutes. We will start with a brief presentation from our faculty, and then we will move to questions and answers towards the end. For this edition, we are pleased to welcome Joe Hernandez, an executive education faculty member who often teaches negotiation in our custom programs. Joe is a graduate of the University of California, San Diego, and has an MBA from the Anderson School of Management at the University of New Mexico. Joe has worked in a variety of contexts, gaining the bulk of his professional start by being the Senior Vice President at Entrado, where he led international strategy and business development. Later, he was the CEO of Building DNA and is now the Chief Revenue Officer at Atos. The common strand of Joe's career has been business development, driving revenue, and macro strategy within the industry of security and first responder companies. And it is in these roles that he honed his expertise in negotiation. One truly interesting element of Joe's background that is germane for today's discussion is his careful study and mentorship under some of the most brilliant negotiation scholars researching today. That careful study, coupled with his everyday on-the-ground practice of negotiation, has made him a sought-after consultant, speaker, and executive in the art and science of negotiation. Joe has continued this work alongside his other executive roles by operating Lionshare Negotiations for the past 8 years. And Lionshare helps companies negotiate better. Joe, it's so great to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Before I hand the webinar over to Joe, let me remind the viewers to shoot in a question at any time in the question and answer section at the bottom of your screen. So oftentimes people will put them in the chat box, and it's really helpful to us as hosts if you will use the Q&A tab at the bottom. We will attempt to answer as many questions as we can live, but if we don't get to yours, we will record an answer for you with Joe, and we will add it to the follow-up email that will go out following this webinar. So Joe, without any further ado, the floor is yours. Please take it away.
Great. Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And hopefully everyone can see the presentation. Can we all see it?
Yeah, we're good. We're good.
All right, perfect. Well, listen, I wanted to start off by letting you know that in our practice in professional negotiations, we made a discovery. And the discovery is that negotiation is a science and not some mystical art. So if it's a science, it would stand to reason that there should be processes and tools and strategies that you can use over and over again to help you consistently get the best outcomes possible, and even make predictions about where you're going to end up. And indeed, this is the case. And today I'm going to share with you the top 3 negotiation strategies that we utilize as professional negotiators. And I would tell you that these 3 are not well known, which is why I'm kind of alluding to the fact that it's kind of top secret. It's really not top secret. It's just that most people don't know about these strategies, and they don't know how incredibly powerful and effective they can be unless you do this on a regular basis. Here are the 3 that I'm going to be sharing with you today. So the first one is make the first offer. Now, I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I'm going to share with you the rationale in just a moment. Secondly, have a concession strategy. Shockingly, most negotiators, when they go into the negotiation environment, have no strategy as to how they're going to deal with concessions. And here's the bottom line. The other party is going to ask you to make concessions, so we need to be ready. And then third, when you make your presentation in the negotiation for offers, bring multiple offers. Don't bring just one. And I'll get into the rationale behind this in just a moment. But let's talk about this idea of making the first offer. Why should we make the first offer? And the reason is anchoring. It allows you to anchor the negotiation and drive the outcome of the negotiation in your favor. But what's anchoring? Well, psychologists have done a ton of work around this particular human heuristic, and it's something that you can count on that the human brain does on a consistent basis. But here's what the anchor rule states. A number that a person sees or hears prior to making a guess influences that guess. Now, what does that have to do with negotiating? Well, negotiating is all about guessing. What's the other party going to be like? Are they going to be collaborative or competitive? How much are they going to ask of me in concessions? Am I going to get a good deal or a bad deal? Negotiating is so much about guessing that it is extremely susceptible to this anchor rule. So let me show you how this anchoring phenomenon works. So there were these psychologists that did an interesting experiment as people were coming into a theater to enjoy a show. And what they did was, as people walked into the theater, they were asked to pick up a little square of paper, something like this, and write down the last 2 digits of their social security number on this piece of paper. Then on their way in to be seated, they were asked to participate in a silent auction for a wireless mouse, something like this that you would use for your computer. They were asked to take the piece of paper that had the last 2 digits of their social on it, turn it over and write down their bid for the mouse and slip it in the box. Do you know that those that had the higher number for the last 2 digits of their social bid up to 300% higher for the mouse? What's going on here? Anchoring. And there's experiment after experiment that shows how incredibly susceptible humans are to being anchored on a number that they see or hear. So how does this work in an actual negotiation? So I want you to imagine that the person on the right is a sales professional, the person on the left is the buyer. They've had plenty of time to understand each other's requirements and needs, and the salesperson feels like they know the scope of the opportunity, and they believe it's worth about $80,000. So they put that in their forecast. But then the sales professional asks this question of the buyer: what's your budget for this particular project? Now, the reason the salesperson asks this is because they're trained to ask it. It helps them understand, do they have money? And secondly, how much do they have? And based on that, I'll be able to determine how I need to scope this project appropriately. So when she asks the buyer, what's your budget? The buyer says $50,000. Interestingly enough, the sales professional completely pushes the $80,000 aside and starts to rescope the project to land within the $50,000 budget that the buyer just said they have available. That's anchoring at work. And here's the worst part. Do you think when you ask somebody to give you their budget that they're going to give you the real number? Absolutely not. Our research has shown that people usually are not very honest with you when you ask them what their budget is. And so as a result, here the sales professional is bending and squeezing to fit into an arbitrary, fictitious budget number. And that is incredibly terrible when it comes to getting great outcomes. This particular sales rep is toast on this deal. It's already been called because the buyer anchored that sales professional. Now, this will probably make you really believe that you should be making the first offer. There was research done at Northwestern University where they studied hundreds of negotiators in live negotiations. And as they were auditing these negotiations, an interesting and very profound things started to appear. And here's what started to show up. The opening offer correlates 0.85 with the outcome of the deal. If 1.0 is a perfect correlation, 0.85 is pretty close to a perfect correlation. And so what they determined was that the first offer drives the outcome of the negotiation. I have tested this. This is indeed true in just about every case that I've tested, and I would encourage you to test it too. So, strategy number one, make the first offer and drive the outcome in your favor. Strategy number two, make sure you know what you're going to do related to concessions. And there are 4 key elements to a strong concession strategy. Number one, give yourself room. That sounds like sort of common knowledge, but some people don't give themselves enough room going into the negotiation to make concessions. Remember, it is very likely the other party is going to ask you to make a concession, so just be prepared. And by the way, if you don't give them a concession, they will not be satisfied with the outcome. They'll feel like they haven't extracted the value from you they needed to during the negotiation. So let's plan to make concessions. Secondly, before you sit down at the negotiating table, know what concessions you are going to potentially make and put a value on each one. This way, you're not surprised when they ask you to make a concession, you're prepared, and when you make the concession, you know just how you've impacted the financials of your deal. Third, when you make your concessions, make them in small increments. What this does is it signals to the other party that you're here to negotiate, that you are flexible, but that you don't have a lot of room. The other thing we found out about small incremental concessions throughout a negotiation is that the other party feels much more satisfied at the end because they've had a series of small wins throughout the negotiation. Alternatively, if you give them some big concession during the negotiation, it tends to feel arbitrary, disingenuous, and they start to question, did you really overinflate your initial offer so much that you're now gaming me? And so small increments really helps us avoid that situation. Lastly, always get something in return. This is one of the most powerful elements of the concession strategy. And I would tell you that if you did all 4 of these things, you're going to see a material improvement in your outcomes. But if you just do number 4, it is so simple and easy. And this can make a material impact on your deal right away. Always remember, when somebody's asking you to make a concession, you're giving up something of true financial value. It's only good business that you get something of true financial value in exchange. And it's very easy to do. There's no better time to ask for something from someone than just after you've given them something. It's called reciprocity. All right, and the third strategy is when you go to the negotiation table, bring multiple offers. Don't bring just one. If you bring just one offer, it gives them no choice. They feel stuck with your offer, and if it's not really what they want to do, they're going to fight back, and this is going to cause some unnecessary conflict during the negotiation. If you want to drive a collaborative negotiation from the get-go, this is the way to do it. What multiple offers allows you to do is provide a choice, which everyone prefers. And so having a choice tends to make this much more collaborative. Secondly, you should bring a minimum of 2 alternatives, but no more than 3. So when you're bringing multiple offers, minimum of 2, so they have choice. But if you go beyond 3, that's too much choice, and the brain breaks down, and then they just say, get out of here and bring me an offer that I can consider. Make sure that your offers, the multiple offers that you bring, are equivalent in value to you. This allows you to be indifferent as to which one they pick. And it's going to allow you to get some clues on what's more important to them. Number 4 is show all the options all at once, simultaneously. Don't try to reserve them in your back pocket and pull them out when you think you need them. Show all 3 of them so that they get the sense of options and choice. What we've found is when you go into a negotiation with multiple offers, it allows you to anchor the negotiation. In other words, make the first offer and do it more aggressively than you normally could. This element of choice allows some more aggressiveness in how it is you anchor and make that first offer. When you bring in your multiple offers, once they start to lean toward one of them, it now gives you clues about what's most valuable to them. And by learning what are the most important points, you start to understand what their agenda is, and it allows you to streamline the negotiation process. And that's sort of the last bullet is, by using multiple offers, you speed up the entire negotiation process. So this is called multiple equivalent simultaneous offers. I know that's a mouthful, but they're multiple, they're equivalent, and you show them simultaneously. The acronym for that is MESOs. And if you were to Google that, you would see some really deep research on why this gives you better outcomes. But you'll also see some study from Professor Victoria Husted Medvec. She is a professor at Northwestern University at the Kellogg School of Business. And Vicki and I worked over a decade perfecting MESOs out in the field. And so this is one of the most powerful tools that you can use. So again, the 3 top negotiation strategies that I'd like you to learn and actually start to execute on today in your next negotiation is make the first offer, anchor the negotiation in your favor, have a concession strategy, make sure you get something in return, and present multiple offers or MESOs to drive a more collaborative negotiation and to allow you to anchor more aggressively, driving much better outcomes overall. And with that, we will open it up to questions.
Joe, that is amazing. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for this presentation. I think very, very rarely in learning and development do you have a presentation that completely blows up your entire conception of how negotiation should work. And I think that's what you've done for us as participants and learners. So thank you. That's just amazing. One of the things that stood out to me that I want to highlight for the viewers is just how rooted literally every single one of your points were in research on behavioral science. That is what is so remarkable about this. It's sort of like coming out of the dark ages of negotiation into research-based science, as you led off with in how to negotiate. So just thank you so much for the great work that you've done there. And we've got a stream of questions coming in. So let's just hop straight into them. First off, Lily Schneider asks, can you give us an example of getting something in return from the negotiation?
Yes, that's a great question. So let's say you're in the negotiation and the other party says, you know what, your pricing is too high. Is there any way that you can reduce the price? And so you could say, well, there is something that I might be able to do to reduce the price if you can extend the term of our agreement by another 24 months. Or if you could make us your exclusive provider for the next 36 months, right? It's not just giving the price reduction or concession, but it's getting something of value in exchange for what it is that you've just given up. That's the key.
That's awesome. I mean, I think a lot of times it's easy when you're in a sales or business development role to forget about the time and expense spent in acquiring even a repeat customer again. So that it's easy to overlook that you can actually have a lower price and a greater margin if you employ that. Great point. Angela Sims Seha says, MESOs, please state the professor's name and organization again. Thank you.
Yes, Victoria Husted Medvec. So Professor Medvec, the Kellogg School of Business at Northwestern University in Chicago. And she's put a bunch of research out there with other collaborators that I think you'll find fascinating.
Awesome. Thank you. Nikki Carousel says or asks, how do you anchor when you aren't dealing with dollar amounts? Great question.
Yes, well, what we found is that you can anchor on anything. You can anchor on the term of the agreement. You can anchor on, let's say it's not a dollar amount, but you can anchor on the product set or suite of products that you're trying to sell. You could anchor on the number of facilities that you might be serving. You can anchor on payment terms, on exclusivity, any deal term that you can imagine in your negotiation, you can anchor on. But you have to make sure that it's visible with some kind of an offer and you're articulating it. So it's what they see and or hear that sticks in the brain that helps the anchor set. Now, here's a really key thing about anchoring. You need to make sure that you can rationalize your anchor position. You need facts and data to make sure that it makes sense to them, not so much to you, but to them as to why your anchor is rational. So that's really critical to make sure that that anchor sticks.
Great. Here's another question. This is a good one. Thank you. First of all, the attendee says, anonymous attendee says, thank you. I've learned so much. What should you do if they have made the first offer and you can't make that first anchoring offer? What do you do in that case?
Yeah, that's a great question. You can actually re-anchor an anchor position provided by another party, but there's a process you have to take. The first thing you have to do is you thank them for their offer, but then respectfully you say that their offer doesn't make sense, and you have to use facts and data to tell them why that offer really doesn't align with what we're trying to get done. You know, your offer doesn't quite hit the mark because of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Once you've done that, then you reset the anchor and tell them why yours does make sense, right? So you got to have rationale behind your new anchor. But here's the thing. The real issue is you have to already have your anchor baked up here before that whole exchange begins, because if you don't and they anchor you first, you're toast. Your deal's just been called.
Yeah, great point. That's so easy to overlook in negotiation. Yeah, fabulous. And actually, for viewers that watch a lot of the Accelerate webinars, you will remember that this spring, when we were talking about leadership in emergency situations, our teacher talked about pre-preparing for tough situations, and that's exactly what has popped up here again. Keely Goal asks, first of all, she says, so insightful. We have the concept of anchoring bias in auditing, and we strive to mitigate the bias so we don't just default to taking the client's numbers at face value. I think that's an interesting point, and thank you, Keely, who many of the viewers will note, teaches finance and accounting for us in Exec Ed. So good to see you on this webinar, Keely. And then Ben Gary asks the question, how does the initiation of the first offer benefit more than the traditional sense of seeing where their head is at? And with the counterpart making the first offer, you get a sense of their establishment. Can you still anchor with your counter offer to establish a higher ZOPA, Z-O-P-A?
Great question. Oh, somebody knows some anchoring science here. I love it. The big rationale behind that is, if they make the first offer, or you ask them for their budget, or you ask them, what are they planning to pay? I understand what you're trying to do. You're trying to qualify them. You're trying to figure out, should we be spending any more time with these folks? Do they have money in the budget, and is it appropriate? I get that. But what happens is, the minute they open their mouth and give you the number, the anchor phenomenon is in play.
Sure.
It will impact your counter, and your counter will end up less potentially than you were going to ask for. And there's actually a science as to how it is you actually anchor. And I can't get into a lot of detail around it, but the interesting thing is, you talked about ZOPA. ZOPA also represents your table stakes. It's how much is on the table to be negotiated. So once you define the ZOPA, you know what the table stakes are. And typically what we like to do is anchor just beyond their side of the ZOPA. In other words, let's get to the point where we think they might walk away. What is that point? And then let's anchor just around that point. And what that does is it allows us to go in with an offer without giving anything up to start. But again, you're driving the negotiation in your favor and not being persuaded in any way to move toward theirs. And we've tested it over and over and over again and found our best results typically come when we anchor. But it means you got to know your market. It means you got to know, what kind of margins you need to get and what the market will bear. And that means you've got to have some market intelligence. So we can't just go in there blind. You've got to have some intelligence going in.
Yeah, great answer. And this will be our last question before we close off. This is from Biswanath Das, who asks, how do you overcome the cultural differences in international negotiations? Some of the cultures are hard negotiators and play differently.
Yeah, and we could do a whole course on that. But I would tell you that we've negotiated with all kinds of cultures from Mexico to Vietnam, Asia Pac, Canada, I mean, just all over the world. And I would tell you, you cannot possibly know all of the cultural norms and things that are acceptable or not acceptable. And the best way I've found to navigate those waters is to have the other party assist you in understanding their norms and processes. It's okay to go in and not be the expert on that particular culture. And what I typically do is I will say, listen, first of all, I want to apologize if anything I say or the way that I say it offends you in any way. It is not my intent to do so. And I would hope and expect that you could give me guidance on this process as we go through. And I'm more than happy to accommodate as best I can. And so essentially, it allows you to learn it. They help you learn it. And it's a way of starting the negotiation in a more collaborative manner. And what we found is the more collaborative a negotiation is, the better the outcomes are for both parties. And that's really what we're trying to get done.
A win-win right there. Yeah. Joe, thank you so much. This has been really a truly remarkable session and incredibly insightful. It's like a master class in negotiation in 25 minutes. You've been tremendous. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And for those of you at home, please check out the Executive Education website for more information about our programs. You can do so by simply Googling Exec Ed University of Denver, and you'll find a recording of this webinar along with the dozens of others we have produced over the past year. As I said at the top of this episode, Joe teaches in our custom programs, and custom is exactly what it sounds like. These are tailored programs for your organization. And literally every day we build and deliver programs that are made precisely for your needs. And we have experts to cover almost any topic that you'd like covered, and we're happy to collaborate and negotiate with you to get a perfect solution to your learning needs. Also, we will continue to run these Accelerate webinars throughout the year, so please look for them on our website or on LinkedIn. Our next webinar will be May 13th, when Victor Duraza will be presenting on diversity, equity, and inclusion, how to go beyond checking the box. You can register for that webinar and watch all past episodes on our website. And we also recognize summertime is almost upon us, and that often means you have time on the road or on the trail. And we are excited to announce that we will be reissuing our past Accelerate webinars into a podcast form starting in June. So this will enable you to continue to listen and re-listen to your favorite episodes while you're on the road or on the trail. Once again, thank you for joining us today. We hope you gain new insight that will accelerate your impact in your community, your organization, and the world. From the University of Denver, Daniels College of Business Executive Education Division, we look forward to seeing you again at another Accelerate webinar. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.